Social Studies 30-1 here, taking a look at Putin's Russia. You'll be doing a lot of work regarding this as we go forward for the next couple of days, watching some documentaries, reading articles, and so on. I just wanted to give you an overview of his reign, his rule, and things that you can look for. He's been around as leader of Russia since 2000, so he took over just after Boris Yeltsin um, and his rule of Russia in the 1990s. Putin inherited a Russia that was in economic upheaval, very politically unstable. He's been there for quite a while, and if anything, he has brought political stability and in many ways has helped them economically too. Here you can see the years that he's been the president of Russia. He's been there for a long time. And as you're going to learn in the lesson over the next couple of days, there's even a bill that's been tabled that could make him leader of Russia until 2036 if it's passed, and it's likely going to be passed. Actually, it's interesting that I'm recording this April 21st. Originally, when they proposed this policy of keeping him around till 2036, April 22nd was going to be the national referendum in which Russians voted on this. But during the COVID-19 upheaval, they've postponed the referendum to a later date. It doesn't matter when they give the referendum, the national vote. It's very likely the vote will pass and he'll be Russia's permanent leader until 2036. You need to note that Russia is what we will call a one-party state. They do have elections every 4 years, but they're elections more for show than anything else. Being a one-party state, we've seen this before. The elections are rigged. The elections are doctored. The political opposition is often thrown in jail. They make it tough for them to register to run against Putin. They make it tough for people to vote against Putin. Just understand that it's a one-party state. Putin's party is known as United Russia. Right now, they own 20 or 75% of the seats in what they call their Duma. Their Duma is the name they give their elected parliament. So their Duma is their House of Congress. Their Duma is their or House of Commons. Their Duma is their Congress. Um, the ideology is conservatism, and you'll be exploring what that means over the next day or two as well. Other thing to watch for is repression of the free press. Well, they don't have free press. Reporters are heavily censored, attacked, and even murdered in Russia. And this is not an occasional thing. This is well, we call it a very common thing. Dozens of journalists have been killed in Russia because they said the wrong thing, because they held their government and their leader accountable. So you'll be looking for that too. Lately, the Kremlin, Russian government has really ramped up its alleged confrontation with the West, namely America. And so that is going to be their scapegoat as you study Russia. Russia is going to scapegoat the Americans. As we've learned a lot, authoritarian regimes need a threat. They need someone to blame. They need a scapegoat. So, among other things, Americans will be the target of Russian scapegoating. And I gave you a really interesting stat. I found this, well, fascinating. In that 1989, at the breakup of the former Soviet Union, only 13% of Russians believed that Russia had um, outside enemies that were a threat to Russia. We skip ahead to 2018, and that number's actually risen to 70%. That is a huge increase. The only explanation I can think would be internal propaganda. Um, Putin creating enemies for Russia and making them think that there are external threats to Russia when probably there really isn't. So what this confrontation with the West has done, it's strengthened their platform and their policy. People really believe there's an external threat to Russia, which allows Putin and the Russian government to advance their policy internally, domestically, but also internationally as well because of that perceived external threat. I wonder if this sounds familiar to you. We'll be examining oppression of rights and freedoms in Russia, namely anti-gay rights and freedoms. They've actually passed a law in 2014 known as the Anti-Gay Propaganda Law that forbids the exposure of kids in Russia to homosexuality. We'll look at this in more detail over the next day or two, but it's a really good example of political oppression and just restriction of rights and freedoms for minority groups in Russia. Economically, he has recovered the economy a lot since he took over from Boris Yeltsin. I mean, Russia was on the ropes by 1999. You could make a strong argument that he's brought back the Russian economy, that he has maybe even saved the Russian economy. I've got a graph for you to look at. By the way, their currency is known as the ruble. You've probably heard of that before. On this graph, you can see the increase of Russia's GDP per capita, the red line. So the 1990s would have been the Boris Yeltsin years. You can see there was a bottoming out of their GDP. Putin takes over in 2000, and you get a blossoming of the Russian economy and a big increase in their GDP per capita. A bit of a hit in 2009 because of the global recession, subprime mortgage crisis, and so on. And then the continual increase, although it's not spiking as much as it used to. However, on the downside for Russia, their share of the world economy has seen a decrease, probably because of the decline in the global oil market over the past few years. But I put this in here just to show you that to a lot of Russians, they want Putin. All of the repression aside, the one party state aside, he's done a lot for the economy. He's done things that Yeltsin didn't seem capable of doing. Um, and for many Russians, he is the fulfillment of, not sure if you remember us learning about the great man theory, the Thomas Carlyle theory that a great man will lead people to greatness. That could be Putin in Russia. As we talked about, Putin's Russia is heavily repressive on the media. You'll be studying some numbers and figures for that. Always like that cartoon. So four things I want you to think about: one party state, censorship, suppression of rights and freedoms, and economic recovery. We'll be watching some documentaries, reading some articles over the next 2 days to make a final evaluation of Putin, his government, and its effect on quality of life for people living in Russia.